Once forever took root, they added numbers, not carrots, calculus. The idea slipped in as advice and hardened into law. Spend 1 month's salary on the ring. Later, 2 months. In Japan, 3. It sounded like etiquette. It functioned like pricing power. Ayer's memos framed it as guidance for bewildered young men, a way to avoid seeming cheap. It recast cost as character. Stakes tie love to a formula, and you turn private doubt into predictable revenue. If a man equates generosity with a precise fraction of his income, he's negotiating with his conscience, not the jeweler. If he spends less, he risks shame. If he spends more, he buys virtue. Either way, the seller wins. Action, the rule arrived through ads that spoke like older brothers. How can you make 2 months' salary last forever? Read one line under a gleaming solitaire. In the US, 1 month became 2 by the 198s. In Japan, De Beers' local agency proposed 3 as the proper measure of devotion. Sales reps rehearsed gentle nudges. Most men in your position choose something around 2 months. The phrase did the heavy lifting, most men. He's not choosing a ring, he's choosing to belong. Micro story, a finance trainee in Chicago sits with a salesperson who flips a laminated chart. Salary bands match to diamond sizes. The numbers aren't official, they feel ordained. He points to a smaller stone. The salesperson pauses, then asks, what will her friends think when she shows it? He imagines the moment in a restaurant, the hand extended, the photo, the comments. He looks back at the chart and moves his finger up 1 row. Impact, cost morphs into morality. Bigger spend equals deeper love. The line erases the awkward truth that diamonds don't hold retail value. If 2 months buys forever, you're not supposed to check the buyback price. The script tells you to insure it, to pass it down, to never liquidate it. The warehouse stays sealed partly because the culture polices itself. Meanwhile, Japan becomes the case study in social engineering. In 1966, the country barely knew diamond engagement rings. De Beers and Dentsu seeded the same story with local casting, modern love, Western aspiration, steadfast commitment. Ads featured clean lines, tidy apartments, a modest suit, a small but perfect solitaire, 3 months' salary to honor her. Department stores trained clerks to echo the ratio. Bridal magazines ran features on how couples budgeted correctly. Within a decade, diamond engagement rings went from fringe to default. Stakes, if a culture that prized savings and restraint could be convinced to tie devotion to a number, any market could. The 3-month rule wasn't just a suggestion, it was a ladder into a new identity. You weren't just buying a ring, you were joining a modern story. Action sales scripts leaned on guilt, fear, and pride. She'll wear this every day of her life. You don't want her explaining. This is the one time you get to show her what she means. Ayer's playbook coached jewelers to redirect price resistance toward the man's self-concept. If he balked, they asked about the proposal, the photos, the parents. The ring became a stage prop in a scene he couldn't imagine failing. Micro story, in Tokyo, a salaryman opens his bonus envelope, counts quietly, and walks to a Ginza boutique. The clerk bows and suggests the standard of 3. He hesitates. The clerk slides a tray with 2 options. The smaller looks fine until the clerk places it next to the recommended one. The difference feels like a verdict. He signs. On the train home, he looks at the receipt and tells himself, she deserves it. The phrase works because it's true and because it was planted. Impact, by turning spend into a social benchmark, the industry built a hedge against downturns. Even when wages lagged, the ratio held. Couples cut elsewhere. They didn't cut the ring without explanation. And because resale stayed taboo, there was no easy way to learn the gap between retail and reality. Appraisals for insurance inflated numbers further, creating paperwork that looked like validation. Hidden truth, diamonds are poor investments. The first serious attempt to sell often introduces a hard lesson, offers at a fraction of retail if there's an offer at all. But the rule's genius was preempting that discovery by wrapping the purchase in identity. You don't sell your love, you upgrade it inside the system later. The math worked like a mirror. It showed you who you hoped to be and charged accordingly. And once culture accepted the invoice, the cartel could focus on a different battle. Rivals and rebels who didn't believe in London's choreography. The cartel's quiet wars. Rivals, courts, and cracks. While the 2-month rule marched across bridal counters, cracks formed where geology and geopolitics didn't care about London's plans. In Siberia, Soviet pipes began sending steady streams of small, high-quality stones. In Western Australia, a pink-tinged province called Argyll was about to turn the size mix upside down. And in Washington, lawyers sharpened pencil. Stakes: if new producers refused to feed the warehouse god, prices would stop obeying choreography. If courts pried open the system, the secret that kept the ritual tidy, manufactured scarcity, would sit under oath. The cartel had survived miners. Now it had to survive governments, rivals, and a world that wanted access. Action with the Soviets, De Beers didn't stage a public fight. It staged a relationship. In the 196s and 70s, quiet agreements arranged for Moscow's output to enter the single-channel system. Russia got cash and stability. London got control over assortments that would have flooded the market with small goods. Boxes leaving the Diamond Trading Company included parcels nobody saw straight from Siberia, rebundled into London's narrative. The choreography held, barely, because the partners decided not to dance alone. Meanwhile, something else was happening at the edge of the Indian Ocean. The Argyle mine, opened by Rio Tinto in 1983, produced mountains of smaller brownish stones alongside rare pinks. The size and color profile didn't fit London's preferred mix. Argyle tried the single channel, then balked. The economics of shipping low-value stones halfway around the world to accept take-it-or-leave-it pricing didn't add up. Argyle broke ranks, selling directly through tenders and alternative channels. Suddenly, cutters in India had volume and Surat's factories roared to life. A parallel pipeline formed, and for the first time in decades, a major source declined the warehouse's invitation. Impact: the cartel didn't collapse, but its authority shifted from command to persuasion. De Beers could still set tones and messages, but now it negotiated with producers who had options. Market share slid from near total to a dominant plurality. The industry entered a phase where compliance wasn't assumed. It was bought with marketing co-op funds, with promises of brand halo, with selective scarcity for the categories that mattered most to retail storytelling. Courts added pressure. In 1945, the U.S. Department of Justice filed an antitrust suit that didn't stick, but it changed the temperature. Through the post-war years, price-fixing allegations kept De Beers' top executives effectively exiled from the American market. They did business at arm's length through intermediaries and subsidiaries while avoiding U.S. soil to dodge subpoenas. The symbolism mattered. The company that defined American engagement culture couldn't set foot in its largest retail arena. Microstory: a De Beers executive lands in Canada, not New York, to meet American partners. The itinerary includes a conference room near the border and a carefully timed return flight. He carries no rough, no memos, just talking points about stability. The absence in the U.S. isn't logistics, it's law. Action: the legal drumbeat got louder. Class actions in the early 200s accused De Beers of monopolizing rough supply and fixing prices of polished stones. In 2004, the company pleaded guilty in Ohio to price fixing in industrial diamonds and paid a $10 million fine, a separate market but a public admission. In 2008, a broader settlement approved in U.S. courts included $295 million to consumers and injunctive relief, promising to avoid monopolization and price fixing. Paperwork replaced whispers. The cartel's methods were no longer a rumor, they were exhibits. Impact: compliance departments grew where stockpiles once did. De Beers reframed itself from a cartel to a brand steward, forever mark, origin stories, ethics messaging. It still influenced prices, but through producer responsibility, marketing narratives, and selective release rather than iron grip. It remained the buyer of last resort sometimes, but the term softened into market support. Meanwhile, the Soviets became Russia, and ALROSA grew into a state-backed giant with its own auctions and strategies. Canadian mines added clean origin competition. Lev Lviv disrupted sorting and distribution in Africa, pushing cutting and polishing closer to source countries and chipping at London's centrality. Governments in Botswana and Namibia negotiated for more value at home, including local sites and downstream jobs. Every shift pulled a thread from the single-channel fabric. Stakes: if producers sold more outside the system, the smooth price line risked jagged edges. If auctions normalized transparency, the old mystique around allocations would erode. If legal exposure remained, American retailers might distance themselves from the company that had taught them how to sell forever. Action: De Beers pivoted to managed influence. It funded generic advertising less and brand-specific messaging more. It championed the Kimberley process publicly, aligning with governance at the very moment governance threatened old habits. It built partnerships that looked like nation building, beneficiation agreements, training programs, sorting centers in Gaborone. Influence migrated from vaults to relationship. Microstory, in Gaborone, a young sorter clips a loop to his eye under LED lights, learning to see what London once taught behind closed doors. Outside, a billboard carries the old forewords beside the new brand mark. The center of gravity has moved, but the script on the street still rhymes. Impact, by the late 200s, the cartel wasn't dead, it was distributed. Market share fell, but norms held. Producers still watched one another, sensing that if anyone flooded the market, everyone suffered. The prison of mutual interest lingered even as the warden stepped back. The culture de beers built, the Neil, the box, the ratio, kept retail steady through turbulence that might have wrecked another luxury category. But the quiet wars left scars. The warehouse god had been seen, if only through legal filings and news reports. Consumers heard about cartels and price fixing. Rival producers learned they could speak directly to markets and courts. And just as the industry adjusted to a world of managed influence, another disruption started to hum in laboratories. Carbon coaxed into crystals without mines, without vaults, without London. Blood diamonds, the price paid in places without a voice. While London rehearsed scarcity and Madison Avenue rehearsed forever, something else was happening far from boardrooms and photo shoots. In the 199s, diamonds started paying for wars. Sierra Leone, Angola, the Eastern Congo. Rough stones moved through bush airstrips and border posts, traded for rifles and fuel, turning a luxury script into a survival economy for men with guns. Stakes, the human ledger sits on the other side of a velvet box. In Sierra Leone, rebels hacked off hands to erase votes and to control diamond fields. In Angola, battles dragged on because diamonds kept buying ammunition. In the DRC, child soldiers guarded pits where diggers worked for food. The cost wasn't a discount. It was a boy missing school, a village emptied after a raid, a river clouded with tailing. Action, the business model, was crude and efficient. Fighters seized alluvial fields where diamonds could be dug by hand. Local commanders taxed everything that moved. Smugglers bought rough with cash or weapons, bribed their way through checkpoints, and funneled stones toward trading houses in Monrovia, Banjul, or beyond. By the time parcels hit Antwerp, origin had been washed by paperwork and distance. The same sizes that lit up bridal cases had financed a checkpoint where a man knelt in the dust. Microstory, a teenager named Musa in Kono district spends his morning sifting mud in a shallow pit, eyes scanning for a glint that could change nothing for him and everything for the commander who controls the field. When he finds a shard, he hands it over. That afternoon, a plane idles on a strip beyond the trees. A man in sunglasses counts stones, signs a notebook, and drives away. 2 months later, a jeweler in Milan unwraps a parcel and says, "Good make." Impact, the term blood diamonds, enters the public square. Activists push photos and testimonies into newspapers that used to run society stories seeded by ad agencies. Global Witness publishes a rough trade in 1998, mapping diamonds to war in Angola. The United Nations issues reports that name routes and traders. Suddenly, the industry's biggest fear isn't price volatility. It's a boycott that makes conflict-free the only phrase a couple wants to hear. Action, governments and industry gather in Kimberley, South Africa, in 200 to design a fix. The Kimberley Process Certification Scheme launches in 2003, an agreement among participating countries to certify shipments of rough diamonds as conflict-free and to refuse trade with non-participants. Boxes get seals. Certificates get numbers. Customs agents check forms. Retailers print new placards promising ethics alongside sparkle. The system looks like a firewall. Meanwhile, there's a problem the paperwork can't touch: the definition. Conflict means diamonds sold to fund rebel movements against recognized governments. Nothing about state violence, forced labor by soldiers in uniform, or beatings in mines that happen to be legal on paper. If a government abuses minors, the Kimberley process still stamps the parcel. If smugglers route stones through a compliant neighbor, the seal can follow the story, not the ground. Microstory, in Zimbabwe's Maringe fields, soldiers corral villagers to dig after a discovery turns scrubland into a frenzy. Reports describe beatings and dogs, yet the country's exports, once the politics align, carry certificates. In a mall, a couple hears conflict-free and relaxes. The label is doing cultural work the mine never did. Impact, the certification calms the market, but critics keep pulling at threads. Human Rights Watch calls the scheme in danger of irrelevance if it ignores abuse by states. Time runs a feature years after the launch and says the hard truth out loud: there's almost no way to know for sure. The industry counters with audits, chain of custody brands, and origin stories engraved on girdles. Consumers want a clean conscience. Jewelers want clean talking points. Action brands pivot to responsible sourcing and from this country as value props. De Beers champions the process it helped shape and launches Forevermark with promises of tracking and selection. Retailers train staff to answer the question before it's asked. Yes, certified. Yes, conflict-free. Yes, ethical. The sale now includes reassurance as a feature. Meanwhile, artisanal miners keep washing gravel in rivers from Sierra Leone to the DRC, hoping for a small stone that might pay a clinic bill. Micro-story: a woman named Mariama in Koidu checks her son's cough and decides to sell the tiny diamond she received as partial pay. The buyer weighs it, shrugs, and offers a few bills. She takes them. In a glossy store 3 continents away, a clerk says, "These are heirloom pieces." Two realities share a supply chain and never meet. Stakes: if the public decides the ring funds violence, the ritual fractures. If the fix looks like theater, trust bleeds out slowly, then all at once. The industry's response mixes true progress, less war financing by rebels, with gaps you could drive a convoy through. The cost of the loopholes sits with people who never see a store window. Impact: the 2006 film Blood Diamond gives the issue names and faces. Viewers leave theaters asking hard questions. Sales don't collapse, but conversations change. Couples start to ask origin before carat. Some drift to Canadian stones, some delay, some look at lab-grown and see a way to skip the mine entirely. The market reads it all as risk and opportunity. The romance was engineered. So were the ethics to an extent. But stones pulled from places without a voice keep forcing the same question. What does forever mean if getting there hurts? Lab-grown, the stone that breaks the spell. The first time a diamond grows in a chamber, nobody kneels. There's no mine headframe, no dynamite, no red dust in the lungs. There's a hum, a hiss, a rectangle of glass, and inside it, carbon rearranges itself into something the world once thought only volcanoes could make. Chemical vapor deposition, high pressure, high temperature, CVD and HPHT sound like lab codes. They're really ways to turn methane and electricity into crystals with the same lattice that held 1,000 proposals together. Stakes: if you can make a diamond anywhere with a power line and patience, what exactly was scarce? Not the sparkle, not the hardness, maybe the story. A lab-grown stone doesn't carry geology or geopolitics, and that emptiness becomes a mirror. People can project ethics, or they can see a hole where mystique used to sit. Either way, the premium on natural feels like a question, not a fact. Action: HPHT presses mimic the earth. Tons of force, heat that blurs the air, a tiny seed crystal-fed carbon until it fattens into a rough octahedron. CVD chambers do it sideways. A seed plate under a hydrogen-methane plasma, carbon atoms raining down in orderly layers, the crystal thickening over days. Technicians monitor color shifts, tweak gases, and nudge growth lines straighter. When the chamber opens, a dull gray block comes out. It looks like a promise kept quietly. Micro-story: a technician in Surat wipes condensation off a viewport and logs a growth run. 120 hours, stable plasma, good morphology. She pulls the rough from the chamber, marks a saw plan, and sends it to a cutter who spent his career chasing yields from natural stones with unpredictable hearts. This one splits where the model said it would. No tension cracks, no surprise twinning. He smiles because the machine didn't lie. Impact: the first wave of lab-grown hit like a polite cough. Early pieces were small, colors wandered, inclusions looked strange under a loupe. Then the process improved, sizes climbed, clarity cleaned up. Labs graded them on the same scales. Retailers began to add a new case, identical 4CS, half the price or less. Consumers asked the question out loud: if it's the same diamond chemically and optically, why am I paying a surcharge for an origin story? Meanwhile, something else happened faster than anyone predicted: a price slide. As more reactors spun up in India, China, and the US, supply outran the early adopters. The cost of growing fell as recipes tightened and machines scaled. Wholesale prices for lab-grown dropped quarter after quarter. What looked like a 30% discount became 50%, then more. Natural stones held their higher plateau by pointing at scarcity and time. Lab-grown undercut with math. Same stone, smaller bill. Stakes: jewelers faced a split identity. Embrace lab-grown and capture margin today. Buy for hundreds, sell for thousands, while risking the core idea that diamonds justify a premium forever. Refuse and watch competitors scoop up budget-conscious couples, ethical shoppers, and engineers who like truth tables. The counter became a debate stage between status and science. Action, some retailers leaned in. They trained staff to say diamond first and lab-grown second to show fire under the lights and let relief do the work. Couples who came in whispering about climate and conflict left smiling at a bigger center stone than they thought possible. Others hedged, natural for bridal, lab-grown for fashion, a compromise shaped by fear of cannibalization. De Beers tried a straddle too, launching a lab-grown fashion line at rock-bottom prices to protect natural, aura, then adjusting when markets blurred. Micro-story, a couple in Austin walks into a boutique with a spreadsheet. She's a biomedical PhD. He writes code. They've priced kilowatt hours and read grading reports for fun. The clerk shows them a natural 1.2 carat and a lab-grown 2 carat for the same money. She says they're chemically identical. He says, so we're paying for geology. They pick the bigger lab-grown and put the savings toward a honeymoon and a joint brokerage account. They post the ring with a caption, Smart Flex. Impact, the narrative fractures. For some, natural still signals rarity, formed deep in the earth, pulled from a specific place older than cities. For others, lab-grown signals intention, no mine, lower footprint if the grid is clean, no history to carry. The same sparkle becomes two languages, heritage and optimization. Instagram feeds mix both without apology. The industry responds with new meanings for old words. Natural gets framed as more than carbon, time, provenance, the romance of origin. Certificates add origin lines, maps, mine names. Lab-grown brands counter with data, emissions, renewable energy claims, recycling of processed gases. The pitch shifts from forever to forensic. Show your receipts, whichever side you're on. Stakes, if identical stones keep getting cheaper, the product was never just the stone. It was the story wrapped around it and the agreement to keep that story. Lab-grown exposes that by making the physics convenient and the economics blunt. A diamond that doesn't pretend to be an investment asks you to love it for what it is, a beautiful, engineered object that marks a moment. Some people find that honesty refreshing. Some find it hollow. Action, markets sort themselves. Mass retailers stock lab-grown to hit price points and sizes that photograph well. Luxury houses double down on origin narratives, limited mine cuts, and traceable chains. A few independents step sideways, vintage-only, heirloom resets, stones with prior lives. The monopoly over meaning dissolves into a marketplace of meaning. Micro-story, a jeweler in Portland puts a sign in the window, your love, your rules. Inside, she keeps 3 trays, natural, lab-grown, and grandma's diamonds from customers who brought them in to be reset. Couples move between them, pointing, asking, deciding. She doesn't push, she tells stories. The sale feels less like doctrine and more like design. Impact, the lab doesn't kill the diamond. It kills the idea that there was only one way to want one. The spell changes. Some still want geology. Some want engineering. Many want the freedom to say why out loud without a script. The resale mirage. Value you can't recover.